أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Assalamu alaikum everybody. Inshallah we're going to continue with our crash course on how to give a khutbah, and today I would like to spend some time on the idea of research and preparation for the khutbah. It is very important to really research the topic and prepare exactly how you're going to formulate your ideas and how you're going to present them before getting into all the details of the different portions of the khutbah and how it's done. And I'm going to share with you a lot of online resources. There are really, this is just a limited list, but there are extensive sources online and in print. Books in print are really kind of the old school gold standard, and I use them extensively. I have at my home an extensive library, including many of the classic books of Islamic thought, books of hadith, books of fiqh, and so forth and so on. The problem with these books is that sometimes it's very hard to really go and find what you're looking for. Unless you're familiar with the book, some of these books have many volumes. I mean, just to give you an example, one fiqh book has 12 volumes, and it's sometimes very difficult to really pinpoint what you need. A lot of these books are online. A lot of them have been translated into English and other languages, but mostly English. All you have to do is Google the book's name and Google English and Google PDF, and you'll find a link. And you can either browse it online or download it and keep it. But PDF books are not much easier to navigate. I mean, they also require you to flip pages and look at the table of contents and really try to find what you're looking for. Now, a lot of these books, especially the ones written in Arabic and even the ones translated from the Arabic original to the English, are not really indexed. So they have a list of topics. You know, in many textbooks, for example, you will find an index where you can look up a keyword and it'll tell you all the pages that have that word. These books are not indexed. And in an Arabic PDF, it's very hard to search. In an English PDF, it's a little bit easier. You can search for certain words, which may be helpful. Online, there are numerous sites of khutbahs. I mean, that are free. They are available. Almost all of them are Arabic and English. You can toggle between the two. They are quite extensive. I wrote down some of the ones that I use frequently from time to time. Nabulsi.com is Sheikh Nabulsi is a scholar from Syria who's kind of well known throughout the Arab world. He's known for his kind of gentleness, kindness, and he has an extensive website that also is translated into English, and you can search not just khutbahs. He has everything there. He has a tafsir of the Quran. He has a lot about hadith. I mean, it's quite extensive. The UK has a khutbah bank, which is actually quite good. Sometimes you will see things that really don't pertain to us in the United States, so you have to pick and choose carefully. The United Arab Emirates have a website. This is it right here. And they archive every khutbah given in the UAE. So it's actually there. Now, I put this on here, but really I don't use it that much. I use it to gain topic ideas, but I don't really listen to their khutbahs because the system in the UAE, many of you may not know this, but on a given Friday, the entire country has the same exact khutbah delivered in every masjid. Mm-hmm. The khutbahs are written by a team of scholars who are employed by the government, and they write the khutbahs, and then the khutbahs are reviewed by certain people to make sure that it is politically correct and not offensive to the ruling government and their political agenda, whatever it may be at the time. And then that khutbah is disseminated to all the imams of the masajid throughout the country, and they are forced, essentially, either they give that khutbah or they don't give khutbah at all. So I'm really against the concept of it because it's really restrictive, but they sometimes do have some good ideas there that we can look at and try to gain from. Islam Online is a well-known website, has extensive articles and a wealth of information. The same with Islam City. Alminbar.com is a website that initially was only Arabic, and it had written khutbahs and it had audios of khutbahs, but it has been now translated into English, and you can toggle between Arabic and English, and it's actually quite good. YouTube remains a good source. The difficulty with trying to use YouTube as a source are two issues. One is you have to spend time listening to an entire khutbah, but you may only want to take one or two ideas from that khutbah. So if you're going to listen to 2 or 3, it's going to take you several hours to prepare. And secondly, it's a little bit sometimes difficult to search YouTube to really find what you're looking for. And it's not written, so you would have to listen and then write it yourself. Sultan.org, I would encourage every Muslim to go to sultan.org. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this website, but it's kind of like the Google of Islam. It's this huge website that references all kinds of other websites that are incredibly good. And sultan.org is it's Arabic, English. They have several languages. Their English section is actually really quite impressive. I mean, they have articles and websites and you name it on just about every topic you can think of. Their Arabic website is also extensive because it has a lot of good Quran resources. It references the website of just about every scholar you can think of in the Muslim world. It's actually quite extensive, and you could get lost for hours on that website. And I would encourage you, and it's free. You don't have to join, don't have to register, nothing. You just use it. So it's actually quite a good resource, and I use it extensively. Now, how do you? And by the way, Sultan.org also has a lot of books on there, a lot of classics that are there for people to browse through and use and download, and it's all free. Now, how do you begin your research? I mean, this is, the first thing is you have to define your topic, and you have to narrow it down as much as possible, because if you don't, you're going to be overwhelmed with information. And it's going to be difficult to choose which information you actually need. You really have to decide, what is your final message? What are you really trying to tell everyone during the Friday khutbah? And the research should be directed to supporting your final message. And I give you here an example. If you want to talk about the punishment of zakah as a reminder to encourage people to pay their zakat, if you research simply the word zakat, it's going to be too broad. You are going to get lost in a sea of information. You're going to have information about how to pay your zakat on camels. You're going to have information on how to pay your zakat on gold. You're going to have information about the ayat in the Quran about zakah. You're going to have information about the ahadith of zakat. And it's going to take you days to sort through it to really try to get to your idea, which is the punishment for zakat. You can narrow your search, and you can even narrow it more. You can say punishment for not paying zakah, or the punishment in the Quran for not paying zakah, which will give you all the ayat that you're looking for related to zakah. And that's an important pointer, because there is so much information out there that it can be quite overwhelming as you do your research. Now, when you're preparing your khutbah, you have to keep in mind that you need to include in your khutbah at least one ayah of the Quran. That is a requirement of the khutbah. At least the vast majority of scholars feel that that is a requirement. There are some who say you don't have to, but the vast majority are at least one ayah from the Quran, and many scholars say at least one hadith. Now, listening or reading to multiple khutbahs by others who have talked about the same topic can really help you crystallize your thoughts. And you probably will use some material from multiple sources. What you don't want to do is take someone's khutbah and just replicate it 100%. Because the truth of the matter is that what applies to one locality doesn't apply to everyone. What applies to one time frame, you listen to a khutbah from 2002, it's much different than 2020. The technologies available are different, people's priorities are different, the economies are different, social life is different. So you can't really just carbon copy a khutbah and say, I'm going to just deliver the same khutbah. It really doesn't work. It's actually quite, not only that, but each khatib has their own style. And it's very difficult for you to imitate the style of somebody else. And often when you simply use the words of somebody else without using their style, it comes out boring and uninteresting. And really, people don't pay attention and certainly don't remember what you say. So avoid doing that. There's a tendency when you first give khutbahs to want to do this. You know, you kind of think, well, this is an easy way out. You know, here's this guy, he summarized everything. He already did all the research. I just take what he said and just do the same thing, right? It'll take me 5 minutes. Especially if you find a written khutbah, you'll be like, great, I'll just print this out and read it. You know, I'm done. It really doesn't work. It really, really does not work. And if you want to convince yourself of that, I would encourage you to take a written khutbah and then try to find it on YouTube and listen to it. And you will quickly recognize the vast difference between the written khutbah and the one that you hear and see on YouTube. The delivery, the style, the tone of voice, all of it makes a difference in terms of emphasis, in terms of how to convey ideas and points. Body language of the khatib plays an important role in delivery. We're going to have one of these sessions will be about how to give a speech. It's going to have nothing to do about khutbah, just how to give a speech and all the different pointers on how to be a good speaker. So that is some advice on how to begin your research. I do want to talk about English because you know, we live in a country where the language is English, and it is the unifying language because in our masajid, not everyone speaks Arabic. In fact, only a minority of people speak Arabic, even amongst the Arabs. I mean, many of them, their children, young men and women don't speak Arabic very well. They may understand it better than they speak it, but they also have trouble understanding classical Arabic. So if you gave your khutbah in Arabic, if you're an Arab, and you delivered it in classical Arabic, many people may not understand what you're saying or may have difficulty understand what you're saying. And the vast majority of almost any masjid in the United States are non-Arabic speaking. And they speak a variety of languages, including English as their native language, if they're American Muslims. It could be Urdu, it could be an African language, it depends where you are and what the environment is. It could be Bengali, it depends really where you're located. But English is actually in the minority. I mean, Arabic is in the minority. So in order to deliver a khutbah that is in the English language, you need to have two things. One is command of the English language. And certainly do not think that just because you were born and raised in the United States that you have command of the English language. The truth of the matter is that the vast majority of Americans do not have command of the English language. Their writing skills are terrible. Their reading skills are horrible. Their vocabulary is extremely limited, let alone spelling. They don't know how to spell anything. Now with spell checkers, kids don't learn spelling because they have computers that spell for them. And they don't even look at the computer when it corrects what they spell. They just assume it's correct. And it often is. But, you know, having command of the English language is a very important skill if you want to deliver a speech in English. Now that how do you develop your command of the English language? If you're a scientist or you are, most scientists and doctors and engineers, I mean, we're horrible at the English language. We don't. I mean, we can speak scientifically, yes. We are very good at science language, but that's not the English, that's different. So really having command of the English language is an important thing to learn. And you don't have to be a born American to have command of the English language. So just because someone has an accent doesn't mean they don't have command of the language. In fact, most of those people have better command of the language than those who are native born and have no accent, because they actually studied it. I mean, they actually know the rules of grammar. Native borns, they just know it by practice. They don't really know all the details of it. But often those who are not native do learn it, and they become quite good at it. So having command of the English language is really important. And in your research, you're going to have to research in English to find the translation of things, to find the meaning of things. Often you have to find the right words, because the Arabic language, one word in the Arabic language can have multiple meanings. The meaning changes based on circumstance. And often Arabic words don't have a simple one-to-one synonym in English. Often you have to have several English words to explain one Arabic word. Now, the same goes from English to Arabic. Often you have to use multiple words to explain the word. That happens between languages all the time. You can't encompass the meaning all in one word. Often you need multiple words. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the translation of the Quran. There are multiple translations, and they are all very good, actually, but none of them are perfect. Each one of them has some issue. Some of them use Old English. I mean, most people today don't even know how to speak New English, let alone Old English. I mean, it's so complicated. Thee and ye and thou. I mean, nobody knows how to read that stuff. And if you stand up there and you start saying thou and thee, nobody's going to pay attention. Nobody's even know what you're talking about. And especially if they're less than 20 years old. They're going to think you're crazy. They're going to think you're speaking French. They have no idea what you're talking about. So be cognizant of that and try to find a translation that uses modern English language, not the Old English language. Read several translations. Don't stick with only one. Choose the one that you think most accurately reflects the meaning that you are trying to convey, the meaning of the ayah itself. Now, that requires you to know the meaning of the ayah in Arabic in order to say this is the best translation. But sometimes you don't, because sometimes you're using the ayah to support a particular point. Many times the ayat of the Quran can be used to support multiple different points. And you want to find the translation that suits your idea, that suits what you're trying to convey. I strongly recommend that you do not translate yourself. There are scholars who have spent their entire life translating the Quran, literally from college to death, translating the Quran. You're not going to be able to do it yourself in 5 minutes. It's much more complex than that. Language is extremely complex, both Arabic and English. Don't take a crack at it yourself. It's just too complicated, and you're probably going to make a mistake, and you're probably not going to convey the real meaning. The most important thing to do is do not ad-lib the translation while you're standing and delivering the khutbah. And I have seen this, and it is a sorry state of affairs. I mean, you'll have someone stand up there, they'll read the ayah in Arabic, they didn't write down the translation, they just kind of think they'll say whatever, and it comes out completely messed up. I mean, the English means nothing like the Arabic. And in fact, what you'll find is that those who are listening who do not speak Arabic are confused. They're kind of listening and thinking, wait, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't even jive with your idea of what you're trying to convey. So do not do this, because you're going to be nervous. You're going to be focusing on your delivery. So you don't want to focus on translating and delivering. That becomes too much to do at the same time. Now, there are some very good sites for Quran in English. Quran.com is an excellent site. You can choose from multiple different translations and look and compare the different ones. Quranfull.com is easy to read. There's also a recitation available. CoreQuran.com is another good site. It mainly uses the Sahih International Translation, which is more of a modern English language translation. My favorite translation that I use frequently, and I have it in print and online, and I have a PDF of it, and it's widely available. If you have Kindle, you can get it on Kindle for 99 cents. I mean, it's really is Marmaduke Pickthall's translation. I don't know if any of you know who Marmaduke Pickthall is. His story is quite amazing. The translation was published in 1930. Can you believe that? I mean, that's how long ago this was. And he died 6 years after that. He spent his entire life translating the Quran. He was a British Muslim scholar, and he learned Arabic, and he developed command of the Arabic language, in fact, better than most Arabs. He also had command of an English language. He was a novelist. So before he accepted Islam, he used to write novels. So he had really good command of the English language. He actually reverted to Islam at a very young age. I'm sorry, I wrote converted, and I shouldn't have. He reverted to Islam at a young age. I think he was 20 or something, in his 20s. But he didn't declare that he was a Muslim until 1917. He was born in 1870 something. His father was actually an Anglican reverend, believe it or not. And his translation at the time, in 1930, was the only English translation approved by Al-Azhar University. It's available online for free. You can look at it for free. On these sites, they include, well, the ones that have multiple translations, they include his, and you can pull it up. The beauty of his translation, in my opinion, even though he does sometimes use Old English, which you can quickly convert to modern English, it's a simple language he uses. He doesn't make it overly complicated. His choice of vocabulary and words in the English language is so powerful. He really has command. And often he won't go into these long, convoluted translations. He will really give you the simple, direct, straightforward translation of the ayah. And I can tell you that as someone who knows both Arabic and English, I won't say I will have command of either, but I know both languages, and I really love this translation, and I use it extensively when I prepare for khutbahs. Often, if you hear my khutbahs and you hear me read the English translation of an ayah, I got it from Pickthall. 99% of the time, I will use his translation because it is so crisp, so good, so accurate in conveying the meaning that is trying to be conveyed in the Arabic language that I think it's really a phenomenal one. Now, there are several others. Yusuf Ali was another British scholar. He came after Pickthall, and he also wrote a translation that was also approved by Al-Azhar. And there are so many others who really have done a phenomenal job, spent decades translating the Quran. And they're available, they're online, almost all of them are available for free. Hadith. Hadith in English is a little bit more complicated. And the reason is that hadith in Arabic is a little complicated. Oftentimes, you will have several narrations of the same hadith. Oftentimes, there will be differences in only one or two words between those narrations. And so now that makes it very complex. At least the Quran is concrete. We know what it is in Arabic. This is it. The hadith in Arabic is a little bit different. The hadith narrated in Muslim might be slightly different than the hadith narrated in Al-Bukhari, which might be different than narrated in Nasa'i or narrated in At-Tirmidhi. And often these differences are either a few words or add-ons. So it's the hadith with a clarification or with an additional wording from the Prophet ﷺ. But there are, in spite of that, and I really, I just want to say here, I know they're not listening to me, but I want to commend the people who have spent, I don't know how many hours to compile this data and translate it into English. It is an extensive undertaking, but they have done it, and it is available and it's free. And I ask Allah to reward them. I mean, there is just tremendous reward in this. Sunnah.com is a really nice website. If you have not been to it, I strongly encourage you to go just for fun. I mean, it's English and Arabic side by side. So on one side of the screen, you'll have the Arabic hadith, and on the other side, you'll have the English hadith. And you can search by keyword. You can look up things by keyword. It's a very reliable site with very good English translation, and it uses modern English. And it's really, I commend the brothers and sisters, I don't know who, but whoever did it, they really put extensive time, effort, and energy into doing this. Hadithcollection.com is touted as a very good website. Honestly, I find it very difficult to navigate. It is extensive. It has almost every hadith book you can think of, the big six and others. It's English only, so if you know a hadith in Arabic, it's going to be very hard for you to find it. You kind of have to guess a few keywords and search for it. The UK has this extensive website called ahadith.co.uk. They claim on their website to be the web's largest collection of hadith, although I think sunnah.com is bigger. You can search by keyword and it's English only. So that is a little bit of a disadvantage. Now, before you do your research, you kind of have to decide a little bit about the outline of your khutbah. You don't want to aimlessly start searching for things. You want to be organized in how you're going to approach your topic. And you have to think about how you're going to start your khutbah and how you're going to end it. And I don't mean by starting, the initial introductory statement, alhamdulillah. So we're going to get to that. That's the beginning and the end. And the dua always, we end with a dua. We're going to get to that as well. That's going to be a separate talk. I'm talking about the body of the khutbah. It should have a start and should have an end. And then there should be the material in between. Now, starting your khutbah, you have different options. There are different ways in which people start their khutbah. Sometimes people start with a personal story. So you relay a powerful personal story that will capture the attention of the audience and will be the impetus for you to move forward with the topic. Some people start with a powerful story from Islamic history or from the Prophet ﷺ. Sometimes people start with just a statement of topic. I find that boring. If you listen to my khutbahs, I almost never start that way. I get bored myself while I'm saying it. I'm going to talk to you today about salah. It's like, I'm not lecturing in a university. This isn't high school. It's not, that just falls on, people are like, okay, all right, I've heard 10 khutbahs about salah. Okay, that's not, all right, time to doze off, right? You got 30 minutes. I can take a nap with my eyes open. And then, when he says, start saying dua, and then I'll wake up, maybe I'll wait till he says, aqim as-salah, and then I'll wake up and start praying. It's not good. Just people they're not attracted to that. But some speakers really love to do this. They somehow in their own mind, that helps them focus and organize on what they're going to talk about. And that's fine. If that's how they want to start. Some people start with an ayah from the Quran or several ayat. There is one famous Khateeb, he's in the Netherlands. He starts every khutbah by reading about 10 ayat of the Quran. He'll just read. His voice is beautiful, and he reads very well, and he reads them, and that's the start. So that's a good way to start because people start thinking, what is he going to say about this ayah? What is he really going to, what topic is he going to, so you start to develop intrigue in the audience. Sometimes you can start with an impactful hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that is relevant to the lives of the people listening to you. So you have different ways, and this is not a comprehensive list. There are other ways to start as well, but these are just some ideas of some common ways to start your khutbah. So when you're doing your research, you have to look for these things. Okay, you have to find the ayah you want to start with. You have to find the hadith you want to start with. You got to find that story that you're thinking about, that you want to convey to the people. You also have ways of ending the hadith. And I think the ending is more important than the beginning. Now, because most people don't remember what you said in the beginning. Most of us really have bad memories when we're listening to speeches. There are extensive studies that show that most people, they remember less than 10% of what they heard. That's why students have a hard time studying, because they don't remember. If they remembered everything the professor said, they would do fine. They'd get 100% on every test, but they don't. They listen to the professor for an hour. They only remember 5 minutes worth of information. They have to go back and read and review and so forth and so on. You can end with a story that conveys your message. People often remember stories. You can end with an ayah or a hadith that's impactful. You can actually end with your take-home message and say, look, this is really the message. This is what we need to learn from everything we heard today. Sometimes you can end with thought-provoking questions. You don't have to end with a message. You can end with a question. Think about, you can tell people, how would you handle this situation? Now that you've heard all of this, how would you handle that? Think about that when you go home today. Kind of leaves them with something in their mind about what you said that they can move forward with. Now, researching information for the body of the khutbah. So you kind of researched your start and you decided your end, and now you need to kind of really find the material. If you determine your start and your end, then you now have to obtain the material for the start, the end, and the body. Make sure that the ayat you are using are correct, and that you know how to read them, and that you understand them, and that you know the English translation, and that you read it correctly. Make sure that any hadith you use is authentic and accurate. When you're more advanced, you can use some hadiths that are semi-authentic. I don't want to say unauthentic. Unauthentic you should not use at all. But there are some hadith that are authentic, but there's some question mark on their authenticity. Scholars say you can use those hadith as long as you don't use them to prove something is halal or haram. So you cannot use them as law, but you can use them as reminders. So if a hadith tells you to be humble, it's okay to use that kind of hadith. Make sure that all the information in the body of your khutbah is appropriately referenced. This is the hardest part. This is the most difficult and time-consuming part of any preparation. You can't just make up stuff, okay? You are entrusted to stand up there and deliver information to the people. That information has to be referenced. In other words, you can't invent information. You have to study and find information and put it together to formulate an explanation of the idea you're trying to deliver. And therefore, your information has to be referenced. Now, you're not going to say the references, okay? Because if you did that, the khutbah would take 3 hours. But you must have it for your own edification so that you are comfortable that everything you're saying is accurate and correct. And the rare occasion when there is somebody there who actually, knows more about the topic than you do, they might come and challenge you on certain information. Sometimes people come and ask you, where did you get this from? Where did you get this story from? Or where did you get this hadith from? And not because they're challenging you, they're just interested in learning more. They want to go home and research it more. So you need to provide them with the reference. Where did you get this from? And this is sometimes very difficult to do. But it is important. You're entrusted to provide accurate information. And you got to make sure that you live up to that trust. There are several websites that seem to have dedicated themselves to the opening of the khutbah, which I mentioned earlier. Alhamdulillah. We're going to talk more about that, but I just wanted to give you a couple of references. There's a website called khutbahcentral.com. And what it does is it allows you to generate a khutbah. So it actually will generate, you put in your ideas and it'll generate a PDF for you. And in that PDF, there is a beginning and an end. And it's in Arabic and English. So it's quite an interesting website, to say the least. There's another website. This is the address, Khutbahs Online. But really type in the whole thing. And this will really give you the start and the end of a khutbah, if this link here. And if you, the nice thing that I liked about it is it gives you the beginning, a standard beginning in Arabic. It gives you the transliteration written in English. So if you don't know the Arabic language, if you read the transliteration, you will sound like you're speaking Arabic. And it'll also give you the translation. So you will know what you're saying by reading the English translation. We're going to discuss this, the start, in more detail, hopefully in the next meeting, inshallah. There are some very difficult things you will find when you start to do research. There are some challenges. Finding material on certain topics is challenging. Example, I one time wanted to talk about cell phones from an Islamic perspective. There are some issues, believe it or not. I mean, you know, this was a long time ago when cell phones kind of first came out. And I couldn't find much. Right now, today, if you research this topic, you will find a lot. Scholars have opined on a number of different things. I mean, just, you might be thinking, what does cell phones have to do with Islamic perspective? I mean, it's a phone, but, well, there's a lot. For example, your phone has a Quran on it. Do you have to be on wudu when you carry your phone? When you carry the mushaf, you have to be tahir, right? That's the requirement. But do you have to do that when you have your phone which has a Quran in it? That's an important question. Is it okay to take photographs of people without their knowledge if you're in a public place? That's an important ethical Islamic question. So there are a number of things. You know, there are a whole bunch of rulings on texting and email and you know what, you know, and so forth and so on. There are a lot of different aspects to technology and Islam. It's a whole thing. I mean, when you go online and research this topic, you will now, I mean, 10 years ago, you would found nothing. But now you will find extensive information about technology and Islam and the Islamic aspects of the use of technology. And by the way, there are so many different opinions about whether you can touch your cell phone when you're not on wudu if you have a Quran on it. Some scholars say yes, some scholars say no, and they each have their reasoning, and they're both reasonable. So do whatever your heart feels is the right thing to do. So again, sometimes you will have trouble finding material. The other problem you will encounter is sometimes you will find too much material. So for example, let's say you want to talk about salah, but you're not really quite focused on what you want to say. I mean, salah is extensive, right? But you will become overwhelmed by the amount of material available on this topic. Even if you narrow it down sometimes. Sometimes you'll narrow it down, but you'll still find, for example, let's say you want to talk about the sunnahs of salah. I mean, you will find thousands of references. And what are you going to look at? What are you going to choose from? I mean, it'll take you a month to research all of that. So sometimes this can be overwhelming. And when that happens, you may have to either narrow your topic down intensely, or you just have to find another topic and move on. Referencing is a very complicated process. Sometimes you find a reference, sometimes you don't. If you don't, you don't use it. That's really the simple rule. If you find the reference, you use it. And you can't say, oh, well, Abdeen used it, so it must be good. No, I'm not a reference, okay? Any Khateeb, other Khateeb is not a reference. Okay, you got to really go back and try to find where they got it from. One problem you will find when you do research is that you will find differing opinions on a topic. I'm going to give you a simple example of this. One time, not too long ago, I think it was like maybe 6 months ago or so, I can't remember which masjid, honestly, one of the masajid here in Santa Clarita. I finished my khutbah, and in the parking lot, someone came up to me, a young man, and he said, can you talk to us about halal meat? Good topic. And I said, sure. I said, do you have a question about it? And he said, yeah, I see, a lot of people are eating haram meat. And they say it's okay. And I want you to stand up there and tell them it's not okay. I said, okay, I understand. So you're trying to use the khutbah to deliver a message to a segment of the population. And I went home and I actually thought about this. I thought, maybe I could say something about this, And I began to research it, and I found there are different opinions about things. Things aren't as simple as people think they are. Okay. So, and I knew immediately that if I delved into this in a 20, 25-minute khutbah, there is no way I can do the topic justice. I mean, starting out with the interpretation of the ayat, there are so many subtleties to the language that is used in the issue of halal meat in the Quran. And it is those language subtleties that have led different scholars to different opinions. So there are some who say you cannot eat any meat unless it is dhabiha halal 100%. Some say no, you can eat the meat of the Christians and the Jews. Some say, well, no, you can only eat the meat of the Christians and the Jews if they slaughtered it according to their own faith. The reality of the ground today is that in Christianity, they never slaughter meat according to their faith. They just slaughter and eat. There are also so many issues about whether, amongst the Christians and the Jews, whether the animal is killed before slaughtering or slaughtered first. If the animal is killed before slaughtering, then and for us Muslims, it's a maita. We cannot eat it. So there are a lot of, some people say, no, chicken is different than beef. I mean, this is a can of worms. There are hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he was brought meat that was not from a Christian or a Jew. It was from a Zoroastrian, from a Majus. And Aisha brought it to him and said, Ya Rasulullah, we were brought this meat, shall we eat it? And he said, say Bismillah and eat it. SubhanAllah. How do you reconcile that? I mean, now, and it's an authentic hadith. Now, those who say, well, no, you cannot and should not eat anything unless it is dhabiha halal, will tell you that hadith is not authentic. And they will write 5 pages trying to explain why it's not authentic. And most of it's on pretty thin ice. I mean, they don't really have, good support. But this topic is so complicated. And I realized so controversial that there is no way I can do it justice in 20, 30 minutes. This requires a 1-hour lecture, maybe an hour and a half. Plus, it's one of those topics where people should be allowed to ask questions, which does not happen in a Friday khutbah, because the questions often bring out the issues that require further discussion. So this concept of having different opinions on a particular topic is actually quite complicated and really can make your life as a researcher quite miserable, because trying to take all these different extensive opinions and crystallize them into a 20-minute speech is almost impossible. It's almost impossible. And really brings me to the last point, which you can't do justice often to something in 20 minutes. There are topics that require a lot more extensive discussion. For example, just to give you an example, the details of inheritance. People say, oh, give us a khutbah about how we should divide our inheritance after our death. I can't do that in 20 minutes. I mean, I can talk about the importance of inheritance. I can talk about the concept of justice in the Islamic inheritance system. I can clarify some controversies, whatever it may be. I can choose a narrow topic, but to sit there and talk about, oh, the son gets this, and if there's no mother, he gets this, and if there's a father, he gets that, and I mean, it becomes, and if the guy has more than one wife, then this is how much each gets, and I mean, it becomes, you can't do it in 20 minutes. It's complex. There are books, volumes of books written about inheritance. I mean, it's not easy. In Islamic countries, there are scholars Islamic judges who spend their life learning how to do the inheritance and how to divide it. And it's really quite complex. It's interesting that algebra came into existence because of Islamic inheritance rules. Muslims discovered algebra because they tried to figure out how to divide the inheritance, and they had to solve for X, what we call X now. For them, it was an unknown. They called it the unknown. They had to solve for the unknown. And that's how the idea of algebra came about. Um, I believe that's my last slide for today's talk. Inshallah, next time, I'm going to start delving into the traditional beginning of the khutbah, how to formulate that, and a discussion about the outline of the khutbah itself. And that'll probably be enough discussion about that. Will probably take half an hour, 45 minutes. And then subsequent to that, we'll continue on into how to formulate the nitty gritty of how to formulate a khutbah. So at this point, if anyone has any questions about anything I've discussed today, I'd be happy to answer them if I can.